Welcome back to 2K Away. Theme song. I'm Payton, this is Paige, and we talk about murder and the macabre. So last week we left you with Peter Sutcliffe Part 1, and I'm just going to go ahead and outright say it. This is going to be a long one because I don't want to spend any more fucking time reading about Peter Sutcliffe. I'm done. I'm over it. He's garbage, and I'm done. So, that being said, I do have some business.
Okay.
So, I think it was 6 people were arrested yesterday. Because they changed the Hollywood sign to Holly Boob. But the thing of it is, so years ago, people changed it to Hollyweed.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, that was actually like vandalism and whatnot. That was funny. This was so lame. They put a tarp over the H that just had a giant B, and then put like a something on the D to make it look like a B. So it was really, it was done very poor. So they were arrested. So I read the LA Times article about it, and it says a captain in the LAPD was like, "There's no vandalism because the sign wasn't damaged." It's just dumb. So they said that it was a breast cancer awareness message.
Good try. If I would have thought that this was in October, maybe I could get on board with that, for breast cancer month. But I mean,
it wasn't.
You can't try to use that as an excuse.
Yeah, so it's not, they didn't vandalize anything. They're just going to be charged with like trespassing, like it's a misdemeanor.
You're not supposed to go there.
Well, no, and it's so stupid. so dumb.
That's hilarious.
That was the only bit of business that I had.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, were you going to say the business about the woman in Japan?
Yeah, so there was also a woman in Japan that was just arrested because they found her mother who has been deceased for 10 years in her freezer. She just was like, Mom died in her sleep and I didn't want to move. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick her in the freezer and I'm going to stay here.
I read the details. She put her in a small freezer, smushed her into a small freezer and then put the little freezer in a closet.
Uh-huh.
Yep. And she was evicted because she'd stopped making payments. So it's like, really, you didn't want to move, so you stopped paying for your apartment?
That's just because your mom died doesn't mean you stop making payments if that's what you were trying to do, is not get evicted.
I know.
But her mom died 10 years ago, though. That was the thing.
I know.
There's a whole lot wrong with that.
Uh-huh.
We get updates. Yeah. We'll update you, but there's just everything is wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Just everything.
All right. So let's finish Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah.
So just a quick recap of where we left off. Police not doing so great. He has murdered 5 women so far. And as far as evidence, they really don't have any leads. So we stopped in 1977. We got to the end of 1977. So now we're going to start in 1978. 78, from here on, that was the incline, and now we're just going on a quick, just downward spiral from here. It gets bananas. I'm also going to talk briefly about the docuseries at the end as well. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I am going to give my opinion.
Yeah.
So, in 1978, the police stopped almost altogether looking for the person who received the £5 note in January of 78. So they were still looking into it, but not the way they had when it first appeared. And even though he was interviewed about it, Peter was not investigated into further. His name kept reappearing during the investigation, but the Ripper Squad cleared him on multiple occasions. So the body of a sex worker from Huddersfield was found, and her name was Helen Rytka. She was 18 years old. Helen had a very chaotic upbringing, and her twin sister Rita were put in foster care at a young age, and both ended up being sex workers. So those girls had a really rough go. Helen's sister Rita was with her not long before she was killed, and she helped with the investigation in like any way she could. Yeah, so there's videos in the docuseries of Rita helping out in the incident room with the police and like pointing to maps and stuff. Like, she really did anything that she could to help. So Peter struck Helen 5 times on the head as she was getting out of his car. He stripped most of her clothes off of her, but her bra and jumper were pulled up above her breasts. He repeatedly stabbed her in the chest as well.
Oh my gosh. Again, anger.
Mm-hmm. Helen's body was found 3 days later beneath railway arches in Guerin's timber yard, where Peter had driven her to. It was a very dark place. It was wet. It was muddy, like giant stacks of wood everywhere. It's a timber yard, so it's not the most pleasant place. They searched around all the timber and wood because rough wood does pick up things, but he hadn't left anything. There wasn't really much to find.
Mm.
So with cases like these, people are reluctant to come forward with information because clientele of sex workers don't want to come forward for obvious reasons.
Right. Eye roll.
And sex workers don't want to come forward for more obvious reasons. And
Right.
of course, sexism and the fact that I read this whole thing that street prostitution was illegal. It's a whole thing. There was a law passed in the 50s. It was like you couldn't solicit from the streets. It's a whole it made honestly no sense to me. But because of this fact, the police decided to offer a reward of £10,000, and then for any information. So then private companies came forward and put more money into the reward, and eventually,
awesome.
Eventually it got up to £30,000.
Wow.
Because there was a reward, then they got a shit ton more phone calls.
Right.
And no matter how batshit crazy the phone call or the claim would be, they would write it down and file it.
Mm-hmm.
So in the docuseries, they interviewed a number of like people that were like young detectives at the time, and like lower level detectives. Not really, they didn't interview any superiors, obviously, because I think most of them have passed by now, and they were kind of the problem in this investigation. A lot of like lower level cops really did try, but it was just, it is what it is. But they interviewed some of the police, and they said that there was so much paperwork and so many file cabinets where this Ripper Squad worked that a structural engineer had to look at the floor because it was falling in because of all the paperwork and all the file cabinets.
Holy crap.
Yeah, so they had to put in a concrete pillar to hold the weight of the floor up. There was too much paperwork. They were drowning in paperwork and claims and actions. So Around this time is when the term Yorkshire Ripper was dubbed, when it was officially started calling the Yorkshire Ripper. Because of the severity and the brutality of the injuries each woman had suffered, still comparing him to Jack the Ripper.
Right.
So when he was interviewed in 1981 in police custody, he said around the time he killed Helen Rytka, he said the urge to kill women was practically uncontrollable.
Oh.
His claims. So the same month, they stopped following the 5-pound note lead. In January, Peter killed again. A woman by the name of Yvonne Pearson, age 21, who was a sex worker in Bradford. Her body was found at the end of March, so 2 months later, hidden under a discarded sofa near Lum Lane in a red light area of Bradford.
Oh, wow.
So again, she was repeatedly bludgeoned about the head with a ball-peen hammer.
Yeah.
That bastard jumped on her chest and then stuffed horsehair into her mouth from the sofa that she was hid under.
Oh.
There was a
Well, my first thought was, where the fuck did he get horsehair specifically to stuff in her mouth? But then whenever you continued, I'm glad I didn't interrupt you at that point in time.
Yes, thank you.
Wow. The disregard he has for women is unreal.
Oh, I'm going to keep going. Yvonne's not finished.
Oh.
So there was, when she was found, so this is 2 months later. So the body had already started to decompose.
Right.
It was quite a mess, honestly, because, that's what happens. She was exposed to the elements. She was under a sofa.
Right.
There was a newspaper under her arm that dated a month after she was killed, which means the killer came back and put the newspaper there under her arm.
Oh, that son of a bitch.
Yes. So with another murder came more disgust of the police work on this case. Moving forward, a woman named Vera Millward, I'm so sorry. She was age 41. She was a sex worker, and she was found on May 16th in an attack in the car park of Manchester Royal Infirmary. Her body was found by a couple of gardeners retrieving their vehicle. So the investigators found by the drag marks in the undergrowth that she had been pulled away from the hedge out closer to where people would be walking so that she would be seen. He killed her in the parking garage, and from where the murder scene was, he moved her out closer so she would be seen by people. So there were more than 800 patients and staff in the hospital buildings, and the whole area was floodlit. So this was a very public place to leave a body. And they claimed, like in the docuseries, they said he was getting publicity hungry is what they were calling it.
Yeah.
They searched for witnesses, but of course was found with the same public apathy. So they remained in the dark because at this time people were like, well, fuck you. Why can't you get your shit together? So there was no help. So I'm not sure when, but around this time, some letters were sent to the incident room addressing George Oldfield. The letters claimed that the person sending them was the killer. This person was signing off the letters as, quote unquote, Jack the Ripper. They, of course, suspected it was a hoax, but the police thought they were genuine because the writer referenced Vera Millward, who had been killed at the infirmary. They referred to her saying that she had had operations at the hospital. And George Oldfield knew that Vera did have 3 operations there not long before she was killed. And then the investigation started pointing in this direction. So the letters were sent to the lab for fingerprinting and forensic examination on the gum seal. The licked gum strip on the envelope was discovered to be from a man who was a bee secretor, which is actually one of the rarest of the ABO groups. I'm not quite sure what that means. I didn't bother looking it up. And it exists in around 6% of men. So pretty rare. And so the police really thought they had their man here.
Right.
but we're going to move forward a little bit because we're going to come back to this. So now we're moving into 1979. So in 1979, on April 4th, the body of Josephine Whittaker, age 19, who was a building society clerk, was found. She was found in some playing field in Seville Park. She was walking home on Seville Park Moor in Halifax when she was attacked. And this was unusual because this area, it wasn't a red light area. It was like a nice middle class like area. Like it was nicer than the usual areas that they would be finding people in. And it had been 11 months since the last attack.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think they were considering like a cooling off period or whatever. It doesn't matter. So we're moving on. Her body was found by a woman about 50 yards from the road. One of her shoes was found 20 yards from the road. So because of marks in the grass, they believed that she was killed on the side of the road and then dragged to where her body was found. Josephine was not a sex worker and worked and lived in a nice area. So police feared that he was moving out of the red light areas. So George Oldfield made the statement, finally, that no women were safe if she was alone.
Obviously.
So the police had finally acknowledged,
Finally.
okay, now every woman is under attack. So then George Oldfield received a tape from the letter sender who was claiming to be the Ripper. So he gathered the Ripper squad so everyone could listen to it at the same time. They all listened to the voice on the tape, and it said that he was Jack the Ripper. So I'm going to read what the tape said, because I'm not going to read what the letter said. I have what the letter said, but I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to bother. So the recording of the tape said, "I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they?"
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So if that was actually from the killer, the like douchebag, but if that wasn't actually the killer, that person should be behind bars too, because they're awful.
Yep. So they all listened to the voice on the tape, said it was Jack the Ripper, saying he'd kill again. Oh no, that isn't the whole thing. Okay, I just read a snippet of it. Excuse me. I'm really, really smart. So he did say that he would kill again and that George wasn't going to catch him. Blah, 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 blah. Just, but police were convinced that this was the guy and this was a great lead.
Yeah.
So the letters were sent from Sunderland, which is north of Yorkshire. And the police brought in expert linguistics to listen to the tape, and they said that the accent on the tape was either a Sunderland or a Geordie accent. I don't know the difference between the two. I wanted to try. I had plans of watching like videos and recordings to see like what differentiates accents in this area, but I didn't. So from there, they were able to narrow it down to Castletown, which was in Sunderland. So Sunderland police were now involved in the investigation to find the person who made the tape. In September, another body was found, that of Barbara Leach, a 20-year-old student. She left the Manville Arms on Great Horton Road around 1 a.m. Her house was only 150 yards from her, so she decided to walk home alone in the dark. Her body was dumped under a pile of bricks close to where she lived. She suffered multiple injuries, and unfortunately, I couldn't find what they were, but obviously they did connect her to Peter Sutcliffe, the Ripper. They didn't know his name yet, but he was interviewed multiple times in 1979. Peter was. Despite matching several forensic clues and being on the list of now 300 names connected to the £5 note, he was not strongly suspected.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I'll keep going, but it's like there's the photo fit.
Mm-hmm.
He had a gap between his teeth, and now any women that have been allegedly attacked by someone said that he had a gap in his teeth.
Mm.
He had a Yorkshire accent. He had a around the same size boot. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And we're going to keep going. So feminism became a very big part of the culture of Leeds at the time, and the police were telling women to not walk alone, to not go to pubs alone, and if you go anywhere, you should be escorted by another man.
Mm.
So, of course, they were getting pissed because it's like, okay, so we're the ones that need protected, but you're persecuting us.
Yeah.
And you still haven't caught the man that's killing us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So they were infuriated, which I would be too.
Yeah.
So now they started what was called Project R. It was the biggest PR police exercise ever made by police. They spent £1 million and put up posters, take out ads in newspapers, and they would set up big like traveling looking booths with like the phrase "flush out the Ripper" like on the outside of it in big like capital letters around like shopping malls and markets like throughout the area.
Oh my gosh.
And they would have the 3 quote unquote Ripper letters that were sent to George Oldfield, and they played the recording in the tape, or they replayed that tape, the recording that the quote unquote Ripper sent.
Yeah.
They would play that at these little traveling stands. They would play it.
What the hell?
They played this tape everywhere. Everywhere you went, they would play this to be like, do you know who this is?
Holy
shit. I'm
shit.
not even kidding you. You got to watch the docuseries because they show like a police officer went into like a club and like pubs and was like, hey, we're going to play this tape for you. Let me know if you like it. It was insane. They played it at malls, everywhere, on buses, everywhere. Basically, a huge, like, it was like propaganda for the Ripper, essentially, is what it was.
It's like you're not advertising a movie.
Yeah. And
you're trying to catch a fucking killer. And
yes,
this is not the way to do it.
Exactly. So it was because they had no leads again. And this, of course, was a major fucking bust.
Wow.
And they got no leads from this. So they spent So they spent £1 million on this bullshit. So
wasted money.
So we're gonna keep going. So back to Sunderland. So Sunderland police were still looking for the man who sent the tape.
Yeah.
And they had their own ways of narrowing the search. So at first, they did not get a full transcript of the Ripper letters. The Yorkshire police only sent like a sample of a letter. So Sunderland hadn't even seen them in their entirety, so they had to put in a request to see the 3 letters, and then they eventually got them. So it's like, ooh, little things like that. Yeah, so David Zacherson, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, he was interviewed in the docuseries. He was part of this investigation in Sunderland. So he examined the full letters, and in the first one, he uses the writer, he uses the term cursed coppers, which is Victorian language. So he sent someone to the libraries to get anything that they had on Jack the Ripper. He wanted to see the original letters. He wanted to see everything that had to do with the 1888 Jack the Ripper cases, any books that he could. Because the letters that were sent back in 1888 had similarities in phraseology to these letters that they were getting now. So, like, for example, they did it in the docuseries. They showed, like, in the 1888 letter, there was, like, I'm down on whores. And then in the 1978, my purpose is to rid the streets of them. In another 1888 letter, leather apron gave me fits. And then in a 1978 letter, that photo in the paper gave me fits. So he was connecting little things like that to be like, this is weird. So David came to the conclusion that the letter writer was copying the real Jack the Ripper.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so he also said that this is also kind of important. So he said that Yvonne Pearson's body hadn't been found yet when the first letter arrived in the incident room. And he could have easily said, hey, there's a body out there that you haven't found yet. But he was
Right,
only
but he didn't.
but he was only claiming the murders that had been reported in the press. So David Zacherson came to the conclusion that this was probably a hoax. So the Sunderland police submitted a report saying that they had doubts on the veracity of these letters and the tape sent to the Yorkshire police, but this report was fallen on deaf ears because the senior officials in the Yorkshire police were convinced that this was the guy for sure.
That's so aggravating.
Yes, so there's a whole thing. I'll mention something about this later, to the point where some lower level detectives would like come to him with good information, and they'd be like, well, does he have a Geordie accent? And they'd be like, no. And then they would be like, don't come to us unless he has a Geordie accent. It was a whole thing. So,
Oh my gosh.
yes, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the hoax, but it was eventually deemed a hoax. So eventually DNA testing traced the letters back to a man named John Samuel Humble. In 2006, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The charge was perverting the course of justice. I think he should have gotten way longer, but...
Well, this is a very serious string of murders, and very awful murders at that. And you're going to do this shit and turn the police's attention off of what they were trying to do and try to come after that. That's awful. You should never do something like that.
This kind of like goes back to people that will confess to crimes they haven't committed. I will never ever understand that.
Well, and especially if they knew they didn't do it, they're just trying to confess to get some notoriety and, get famous, basically.
Yeah.
Those type of people, no. Because there's a whole psychology on admitting you did something that you didn't. So that's a whole thing. But the people who actually do it, who know they didn't do it, but they're saying that they did it just to get famous, basically, those people are awful.
Yeah. So the hoax wasn't actually realized to be a hoax from the Yorkshire police anyway, until after Peter Sutcliffe confessed. And then, again, in 2005, DNA matches led to John Humble, and he was eventually prosecuted for this, which, thank goodness. He's passed now. But I won't spend any time on him because we're moving on. So now we're moving on to 1980. As a result, Project R, the propaganda stunt, led no results. Shocker. Yeah. So remember when I said that I was going to get back to interviews of police? I'm going to get to that now. So I'm not sure when, but Andy Laptew, who I did talk about in episode 1 with, I believe it was Maureen Long, that he took out to a club to see if she recognized anybody, one of the survivors. Mm-hmm. So he had, in the docuseries, he said that he did interview Peter Sutcliffe once. I think it was around this time in 1980, maybe 1979, that he did interview Peter. He noticed the very obvious resemblance to the photo fit. He said he wore a shoe size 8.5 and had a pair of boots that had similarities to the ones found at the crime scenes, because apparently there was a note that the boot print, there was like one of, I don't remember if it was the left or the right, but they had like a particular scuff, like it was worn on one, like the toe was worn down. Yeah. So it was a little bit more noticeable than any other person's boot. So
Right.
when he took this to his superiors, the only thing that they cared about was, does he have a Geordie accent? And when Andy replied, no, he's local, they were basically like, get the fuck out of here. If he doesn't have a Geordie accent, he's not our man,
Oh my
basically.
gosh.
So in April of 1980, Peter was arrested for drunk driving. And while awaiting trial, he killed 2 more women. So
Oh my gosh.
Marguerite Walls was killed on August 20th, 1980. She was working late at the education department in Pudsey, Leeds. She was a dedicated civil servant, and Marguerite was getting ready to go on vacation, so she was working late to tie up everything before she left for vacation.
Oh no.
So she left work between like 9:30 and 10:30 to make the walk home, and it apparently was a short walk home. Now, what I'm going to say about Marguerite Walls is I could not find a ton on her. And every source that I did find, there was like differing evidence. And they didn't mention her until the very end of the docuseries. I don't exactly know when he officially, as far as the timeline goes, I know he confessed to her murder in 1981. I don't know when in 1981. He was charged for her murder eventually, but it just... But
Wow.
like I said, they didn't mention her until the very end. And it was like a footnote, like, oh, also Marguerite Walls became his 13th victim when he confessed to it. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Okay. Yeah. So Peter saw her walking, stopped his car, and this is kind of what I got from multiple sources. There was conflicting evidence, so I kind of got like a general of what was happening. So he caught up with her and yelled out, this is coming from Peter Sutcliffe, and multiple sources have said this. He yelled out, filthy prostitute, as he hit her in the back of the head twice with a hammer. He then looped a rope around her neck and used it to like half drag, half carry her up a driveway that she was next to and into a high-walled garden. So once in the garden, he kneeled on Marguerite's chest and garroted her with the rope.
Wow.
So once she died, he ripped off her clothes. I saw in some sources that she was naked, and then I saw in some sources that her tights were still on. Either way, he put her clothes in places around the garden and covered her body with grass cuttings and leaves. So gardeners found Marguerite's body the next morning. Her shoes were in the driveway, and her skirt, shopping bag, and checkbook were found in a rockery close to the garden. The postmortem later that day revealed she had 2 blows to the back of her head and had 3 broken ribs from being kneeled on. And
Gosh.
I read that the pathologist, in one source anyway, I read that the pathologist noted 3 scratches on the outside of her vagina that was probably made by fingernails. I don't know if this was from Peter Sutcliffe. And again, I only found this on one source. So her murder at first was not considered a Ripper murder. Jim Hobson was basically the one that gave like the no, that's not connected. That's a new murderer. So yeah, so it remained unsolved until Peter's confession.
Wow.
Yes. So the reasoning, I guess, behind her not being considered a Ripper murder is because of the position of her body. There was no stabbing and there was a rope. He used a rope one other time when he attacked someone. The person that he used a rope on, she did live. And again, because Marguerite had a rope, she was strangled, and she had no stab wounds, they were like, no, this isn't a Ripper murder. He has a definitive, pattern.
Wow.
And I read an interview by him, and he said that the reasoning as to the circumstances of Marguerite's death, he said he didn't have a knife on him, It's plain and simple. He just didn't have a knife on him.
Oh, that's why he didn't stab her.
But he did have a hammer and a rope. So
gotta make do with what you got, I guess.
So he said,
bastard.
He basically gave the reasoning behind not positioning the body. He was like, it was already late that time and there were some people around, so I basically didn't have time, essentially.
Oh my gosh.
So, and again, like I couldn't really find much on Marguerite's death, honestly, and that's really sad. So, moving on, a woman named, I'm probably going to butcher her name and I'm really sorry, Ufadja Bandera, sorry, in Leeds was attacked on September 24th. She did survive. And October 25th, an art student by the name of Maureen Mo Lee was attacked in the grounds of Leeds University. The docuseries did interview Mo. She said that she saw this guy. He kind of gave her the creeps a little bit. She said that she kept walking and hearing it like from her. Like, you definitely have to watch the docuseries. I recommend you watching it regardless. But she said that she started hearing footsteps behind her and she was like, I knew it was like that guy that I saw. And then she started hearing them picking up the pace and then running at her.
Oh no.
And she was like, I started running and then not long after I felt the hit to the back of my head. Oh, yeah, it's awful. So when she was released from the hospital, the police did come to question her about what she was doing and where she was. And then they left. And she heard nothing else from them.
Oh, that is so aggravating.
Yes.
That is just awful.
Yes. Basically, the main things that they asked her was where she was and what she was doing.
Why does what she was doing matter?
It doesn't. That's the thing. So then on November 5th, a 16-year-old girl by the name of Teresa Sykes was attacked in Huddersfield. I don't really know a lot of details about Teresa's attack, but she did survive. So the next person that was killed by Peter Sutcliffe was a girl named Jaclyn Hill. She was 20 years old. She was killed on November 17th. She was a student at Leeds University, and she was from Cleveland studying French.
Oh.
I don't know if it's Cleveland, Ohio, or if it's a Cleveland over in England. I'm not sure.
That was going to be my question. Ohio?
Yeah, so she was attacked around 10 p.m. as she was on her way home from an evening seminar. Someone found her purse late at night and saw some blood on it and immediately called the police thinking something serious might have happened. So they hadn't found her, but they did find her purse. So she was attacked at 10, and I think her purse was found maybe a couple hours later. I'm not sure when her purse was found, but it wasn't very long after she was killed. So the police came, they did an initial cursory search, but they were called to another incident, so they just left. So it wasn't until the morning that Jacqueline's body was found by a passerby. So I saw a news reporter at the scene of the crime. I saw a video of this, and he said there was a 10-hour gap of when Jacqueline was murdered and when her body was found. So if the police had taken, I'm sure they weren't really thinking anything of it, but it's like, come on, there's a serial killer on the loose.
Right. And you found a purse with blood on it.
Yeah, I think if they would have just taken a little bit more time, they would have found her body. They would have.
Yeah.
So now moving forward, after Jacqueline's death, this led to a curfew set by police for all women.
Wow.
A curfew for women.
Wow.
Yeah. So because if you were out alone at night, you were putting yourself at risk. And
oh my.
Yep. So this naturally led to a women's, they called it a Reclaim the Night March. So women from awesome. So women from all walks of life marching, shouting at the police, shouting about the media coverage, male violence, all sorts of stuff. So this was like the boiling point. Like, all this bullshit, and then the women were like, fuck this. So they interviewed somebody on the docuseries, and this is what she had to say. She was like, she felt that the killer wouldn't have gotten away with all that he did if it weren't for the culture of misogyny that they were living in. So there was another woman who could have been saved had they done their jobs properly.
Yeah.
So, and this led to women's marches like throughout the country. And so it was kind of, yes, it was about the Ripper, but then it was about like a million other things.
Sure.
That just like, okay, so we have all this misogyny and leading up. Now we have a serial killer and we're still being treated like shit. We're done. So
yeah,
it was. So they go into it further in the docuseries. They go into the sexism of the case, and they even talk about, just watch it. They go into it much further on the series, but they eventually talk about something that was filed called the Special Report by the Yorkshire Police, which was circulated around the world. Now, the reporter being interviewed in the docuseries was a woman by the name of Joan Smith. She said because of this, they knew that among all the people who would receive this report would be the FBI. So they made a request under the American Freedom of Information Act asking for anything they had on the Yorkshire Ripper, and they got it. They read this file, and it was awful. She reads out some of the things that were said in the file, and it was just like a whole spew of just awfulness. It was shameless disrespect towards women. It was all over this report. A lot of these women were presumed prostitutes, and the police didn't seem to take notice that several of these women were just vulnerable and down on their luck. So, yes, a lot of them were sex workers, but some of them had turned, like, they didn't even take the time to look into these women's backgrounds to see, was this actually their job? Were they just down on their luck? What's the what's their family situation?
Right.
Anything at nature. They just assumed. And then it became fact. So this is where the quote unquote prostitute killer theory started. Just watch the series. They go much deeper into it. And I'm not going to go that much into it, but now this is where they discovered that Wilma Mccann was the first woman killed, but not the first victim of the Yorkshire Ripper. So around this time is finally when they started connecting earlier attacks in 1975 with the Yorkshire Ripper, and the police had such blinders on this investigation that the public was convinced that he would never be caught.
I probably would be too if I were them.
Yeah. So they didn't mention this in the docuseries, but I did read that on November 25th, Trevor Birdsall, which was the friend that was in the van in the first attack in 1969. The very first one, the friend with the van. So all this shit started coming out because he didn't know what Peter Sutcliffe had done. He just came back and was like, drive away. Didn't tell him what happened, nothing. But he knew it was weird. He was like, this is weird.
Right.
So there had been like a few other instances where Trevor did get the creeps from Peter.
Yeah.
I don't know specifics, but he reported Peter to the police as a suspect first in an anonymous letter. I read the letter.
Yeah.
It gives Peter Sutcliffe's name and address. He didn't say his name or anything, but let me remind you of the sea of paperwork in the incident room with the Ripper Squad.
Right, just got lost. Basically.
So, this very damning lead vanished. Then, the next day, Trevor went in person to the police and gave a report. And it was again lost in paperwork.
Oh my gosh. This is ridiculous.
So 1981, in January, officers in Sheffield, Robert Hydes and a Sergeant Ring, I couldn't find his first name.
Huh.
They saw a car with a man and a woman in it, but the license plates, when they checked, did not match the vehicle that they were on. They were registered under a different vehicle. Guess who it was? Peter Sutcliffe.
Fucking Sutcliffe.
He was in the car with a woman named Olivia Reavers, who they said was a sex worker. During the questioning on the road, Peter had a hammer, knife, and rope.
Oh my god.
Officers didn't see this. He told the officer. So it was somewhere. I don't know where it was in proximity to the officers, but Peter was like, hey, I have to pee. So they were like, okay, go do your business. So he walked into the woods. So he was able to go into the bushes and dump all of the evidence that he had in his car.
Oh my gosh. Why would you let somebody you just stopped away from the car in somewhere where you can't see?
Don't worry. We're coming back to it. So they took him to the station for the offense. And that's when the officer saw a photo fit image of the man that was suspected to be the Yorkshire Ripper. Because it looks exactly like Peter Sutcliffe. So this police officer, which was Robert Hydes, I'm not sure if Sergeant Ring went back with him, but I know for sure Hydes went back out to the place where he picked up this man to go search the area. Because he was like, I just have a feeling. So he meticulously searched the area and he did find the hammer, the rope, and the knife.
Gosh.
So, Peter Sutcliffe has been caught. So they held a press conference and it had George Oldfield and there was another, let me go down with his name because I don't remember his name. Chief Constable at the time, Ronald Gregory, was there. He was very involved in this case. They had a press conference and they were boasting that they had caught the Yorkshire Ripper. And the two officers that had pulled him over, they were like, oh, it's just being good cops, you know. Blah, 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 blah. And no matter what anyone says, it wasn't because of good police work that he was found. It was sheer dumb luck.
Yes.
I will give these officers credit that they are the ones that are like,
he looks like that guy.
This looks fishy. And they ended up looking into it further. I will give these two officers credit. They are the ones that actually brought Peter Sutcliffe in.
However, like you said, though, it was just sheer dumb luck that they caught him.
Yes. So when they began the interview, Peter didn't lawyer up, didn't do anything, but he just gave a statement. He outlined all his victims. He went through them in detail, where they were, what the women were wearing, what they said to each other, which car he was in, what weapons he used, and where he disposed of them. Everything very straightforward.
Wow.
Just like as if he were at Subway and he was telling the Subway guy what he wanted on a sandwich. This is what happened. So one of the things that they did when he was in custody was look into his background. And that's when they found that his father had been violent and physical with their mother. So the contempt for women was something that that had been conditioned into him by his father.
Yeah.
Now we see all this unpleasantness unfolding as to the reasoning behind it. Not that that's a good fucking reason to kill women.
No.
So while in custody, the horror show that was this investigation started really coming to light, to the point where even Peter Sutcliffe himself told them of what a joke it was and how they could have caught him earlier.
That's just a punch in the balls, man.
Yeah. So now we're moving into the trial. So it was originally going to be held in West Yorkshire, but obviously the way the public felt about him there, he wouldn't have been given a quote unquote fair trial.
Well, no, he wouldn't have.
No, he wouldn't have. Like that was the best option for them to do. Instead, he was tried at the Old Bailey in London, which is where a lot of like famous murder trials have happened. So they were going to charge him with 13 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. So 13 counts included Marguerite Walls. So he denied the murder charges of the 13 women, but pleaded guilty to 13 charges of manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility. So he was trying to say, I'm mentally unstable and I'm not responsible for my actions. So
bullshit.
So we're going to keep going. I know you want to like throw your computer now. Wait.
Yeah.
Just wait. So the court appointed a jury of 6 women and 6 men. A line of people started the night before outside of the courthouse of people that were like hoping to get a seat in like the public seating area of the courtroom.
Mhm.
And they said that one guy had even been there for 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So April 29th,
Dude.
1981. Yeah. I'm like, that's dedication.
Yeah.
So April 29th, 1981, the trial begins. So the exhibits they included in the trial consisted of photographs, several hammers, knives, screwdrivers, and a hacksaw. I don't know where this hacksaw came from. I don't know why. The first 2 days of the trial was just going over every little detail of what he had told police. Then James Chadwin, QC, don't know what QC stands for, which was the defense lawyer, Peter's lawyer, called Peter to the stand, which is always a very peculiar thing when they choose to actually put the accused
Defendant
on the stand, especially in a murder trial. That doesn't really happen too terribly much. Okay, so Peter claimed on the stand that his mission to kill began in Bingley Cemetery, where he worked as a gravedigger. Now I have the exact quote from what he said on the stand. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to summarize it for you because we don't care. So he basically said that he was standing in an open grave and then started hearing a voice, and the voice told him that it was God. And then
roll.
Basically he told this fantastical story about when he was a gravedigger, he heard the voice of God, and God was like, hey, you should kill prostitutes. And then that's what began. He was like, clearly I'm the chosen one and I have to go on this mission of murder. So
vomit.
Yeah, he was like, I felt so important because I was chosen to hear the word of God.
You, sir, were not chosen for anything.
Yes. So apparently God told him to kill every sex worker he came across. So
again, God doesn't tell you to do that.
I know. So now the big question for the jury was whether or not he was insane, because he did commit the murders. We know that. Now we just have to, debate on his mental status.
Stability.
Yeah. So 3 psychiatrists all took the witness stand with their examinations and interviews with Peter Sutcliffe, and they gave a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay.
So the prosecutor's job was to try and unravel this to show that he, in fact, wasn't schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways he tried to do this was to bring up the fact that Sonia, Peter Sutcliffe's wife, had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia several years prior.
Interesting.
So he would have known the symptoms and how to fake it. Also, the fact that he first started out on women who were sex workers or women who were suspected of being sex workers because of his mission from God to rid the world of sex workers. But then he moved on to just women in general. So it was all a load of bullshit.
Right.
Everyone wants to believe that to do what Peter Sutcliffe did, you would have to be insane. Everyone wants to believe that.
Well, yeah, that's just like when I said you would want to believe that it was a demon from hell that actually did the accident of New Orleans.
Right,
murders,
instead of
because you don't want to believe a human being is capable of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a little quote from the prosecutor, Sir Michael Havers. And again, this goes to show the atmosphere at the time when it comes to sex workers and women and things of that nature. There's a quote from him I read in an article that says, some were prostitutes, but perhaps the saddest part of this case is that some were not. The last 6 attacks were on totally respectable women.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And we're not even going to discuss that because we know it's all horseshit, but we're going to keep moving.
I can't say anything other than wow.
I know. So the verdict came on May 22nd, 1981. The jury 10-2 found him sane and knowing full well what he was doing.
Right.
Guilty. They gave him 20 life sentences, and he was sent to Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight. Now we're behind bars. in March of 1984, 3 years later, Peter was transferred to Broadmoor Hospital. He basically convinced authorities that he was mentally ill and needed psychiatric care.
Oh, geez.
Broadmoor was a much nicer of place than prison, obviously.
Right.
If you are deemed mentally ill, then you have more privileges than if you were sent to prison, like TV, phone calls, and you can have more visitors. So this pissed everybody off, which it pisses me off too.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So while behind bars, Keith Hallowell, who is now Chief Constable of Yorkshire Police, he was involved in the Ripper Squad as a young detective, and he was promoted to chief in 92. He was still investigating Peter Sutcliffe even while he was behind bars. So Keith Hallowell, who they also did interview in the docuseries, I'm pointing to my TV, but
There's
so
no need.
stupid. I know. So he suspects Peter Sutcliffe of 8 more murders. So he went to talk to Peter because I guess he started out with like a list of like 20 unsolved murders, and then he like got it down to like 10, and then he just like process of elimination was like, these are definitely murders that he could have done.
Wow.
So he talks in the docuseries of basically like when he got to Broadmoor and saw Peter just like standing, hanging out, watching TV, and how angry it made him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so he was like, he was like, I'm going to try and get anything I possibly can from him while I'm here. So in November of 92, Peter confessed to the assault of Tracy Brown, who we did mention in the first episode, and an Irish student named Anne Rooney in 1979. So I did see the whole story of her attack, but I just want to go ahead and just get her name out there. So they interviewed Tracy in the docuseries. So she did come forward after she was attacked. I think it was in 77. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the first episode or not, but she did come forward after several murders, and she was like, and she was a teenager because she was 14 at the time that she was attacked in 75.
Right.
So she came forward as a teenager and was like, hey, I think this guy that's murdering all these women, I think he's the one that attacked me. And I guess the police that she talked to were kind of like laughed her off and was like, oh, this nice story you're spinning. Yeah.
So aggravating.
So eventually this comes out. He finally confesses to Tracy Brown's assault. She wanted him to be charged, but they were like, he's already in prison for the murders of 13 women. There's no point. She wanted him to be charged, but they were like, no. And she was like, so what kind of justice do I get? Like, it was, it was really heartbreaking. And she was basically like, so I want to put him out of my mind. I want to do nice things. I want to just live my life. Sonia divorced him, his wife, in 1994. Which
that took a while.
Yeah. I don't know the reasonings behind it. I don't know. I think that's way too long to still be married to him. They got technically separated and then divorced.
Again.
First of all, you're already separated, but I think it was like a legal separation. Like you have to be technically separated for a number of months or years or something of that nature. I
can't imagine that you'd have to be separated for 13 years though before.
No, you don't.
You get divorced.
You don't.
Exactly.
You don't.
I have heard of you have to be separated for, X amount of months.
Yeah.
But not that many years.
No.
Just get a fucking divorce.
Yeah. So while in prison, through the years behind bars, Peter had a number of women write to him. I even read like somewhere that he had this like pen pal type relationship with this girl in like North Carolina or something. It was like a whole thing. But he had a bunch of women. Yeah, he had a bunch of women write to him over the years. Because when he was young, like he wasn't a bad looking guy. But, as a 70-plus-year-old man, he's all, I'll get to it. But he was attacked 3 times while behind bars. Wow. One in 96, 97, and one in 07.
Damn.
So the one in 97, the inmate attacked him and stabbed him in the eye, and he lost the vision in his left eye.
Oh shit.
You know what? I'll get a picture from his attack. He was fucked up.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But then the one in 07, the guy stabbed his cheek.
Oh,
So he's got like a
shit.
big ass scar on his face. It was great. So he was in recent times assessed that they said that he was no longer mentally ill and able to leave Broadmoor. So he ended up being transferred to a prison in Durham. I'm not 100% sure on what year this is. I've heard because
Sure.
he has had a number of appeals.
Well, yeah, because you get so many.
Exactly. Because I think it was in 2015 that he was transferred to, I think it was HM Franklin, that with the prison that he was eventually transferred to, because he did have like a number of appeals and they were like, absolutely not, you are not getting out, you
Right.
dangerous motherfucker.
I would hope so.
Every time he's been rejected. So now in 2017 though, Yorkshire police launched something called Operation Paint Hall. And when I first read that, I thought it said paintball. It doesn't. It's hall. So where they were looking into unsolved murders that Peter may have committed going all the way back to 1964.
Oh, wow.
2 of which were sex workers in Sweden that were killed in 1980. So I read a whole article that the Swedish investigators were trying to maybe connect Peter Sutcliffe to it, and they worked with the Yorkshire police, but the Yorkshire police later stated that they were absolutely certain that he had never been to Sweden. But don't know.
Don't know.
Now moving forward to 2020. So Peter was already in poor health. He was in and out of the hospital because he had recently had a heart attack.
Oh.
He had diabetes, pneumonia. He was overweight. He was not doing good.
Right.
So then he contracted COVID and refused treatment for it. So November 13th, 2020, Peter Sutcliffe died at the age of 74 of COVID-19.
No, damn.
Yeah. Bye-bye. So I watched an interview with Richard McCann, Wilma Mccann's son, who I did mention in the first episode, and I'll mention him again in a second. But I saw an interview with him where he said he reached out, I think his name's Carl, one of Peter Sutcliffe's brother. He reached out to his brother and gave his condolences for his brother's death.
Wow.
And I'm like, you wonderful man.
You are a better man than I am.
I know.
I would not be a good man about it.
I'm not a good man now.
No.
I know. And I'm like, you, I think you need to be considered a saint in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. So a private funeral ceremony was held where he was cremated and in an undisclosed location. So I read that the family couldn't be there and that his brother Mick ended up getting the ashes after the service.
Huh.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. through my investigation, I finally found at least 2 names of brothers. Still don't know how many siblings he had, still don't know all their names. So in the few articles that I read about his death and the costs, because there was some people that were unhappy about this, and I'll explain. So rules state that prisons have to help towards reasonable funeral expenses when an inmate dies in custody if the family has no plans in place. So it's designed for prisoners who don't have any money or are estranged from their families. Mm-hmm. It can pay for a funeral director, hearse, simple coffin, and burial or cremation. So it's like bare minimal.
Right.
And like that I understand.
Sure.
It does not pay for a headstone, flowers, obituary notices, or a wake.
Okay.
So the Ministry of Justice came out and said that his funeral expenses cost £3,000.
And that's probably a lot more than they normally spend.
That now I don't know how much funeral expenses typically cost on an average in England and how much that the prison systems actually spend on them. I'm not really sure, but to me that seemed like a lot. First of all, they had a very private ceremony where they didn't even invite the family that the
Right?
family couldn't even be at. So it's like, okay, so what are you spending £3,000 on if there's going to be no service or anything of that nature? If you just
Right.
cremated him and then gave the ashes to the family, then what are you spending so much money on? I'm not
Well, yeah,
sure.
because they didn't need a coffin, obviously.
Yeah. Because I also saw in the articles that I read about this that there were some issues about he and Sonia's house. He was reported to have an interest in half of the house that he bought with his now ex-wife Sonia. And apparently it's worth about like £250,000. So the title deeds show that Sonia is now the sole owner of the house that they did live in.
Mm-hmm.
But she does live elsewhere. But there is a 1983 restriction on the register, meaning any sale must be approved by court order. So if she sells, Peter's victims or the legal aid trust could make a claim on his share.
Oh.
So there, yeah, I don't exactly know how that comes into his funeral expenses. I'm not sure, but that was
Yeah.
another thing. So I do want to share a few things. So Peter Sutcliffe is gone. He has been cremated. He is no more. So I want to do a little bit of like aftermath and just like kind of point out a few things. So everyone involved in the Ripper investigation were moved in different departments, sideline, ostracized, and a lot of people ended up just leaving law enforcement entirely after this.
Yeah.
So George Oldfield moved to, after this investigation was done, he moved to the head of operational services, basically like a pencil pusher. He was absolutely humiliated because now officially what they were calling Wareside Jack hoax has finally been revealed as, yes, it was a hoax.
Right.
And he ended up having a heart attack and passing away in 1985.
Oh
And
shit.
they said that he was like a broken man after this, which,
Yeah.
yeah. So Chief
Gosh.
Constable Ronald Gregory, who I mentioned earlier, he was very involved in big decisions as well. Ended up retiring that June of that year
Wow.
that Peter was sentenced. There was also, he also wrote like a book and basically like told his side of things and was basically trying to like profit. I've seen videos of him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to talk badly on him, but I'm not a fan of him.
Yeah.
So in December of 2007, Wilma Mccann, Peter's first murder victim, her oldest daughter, Sonia Newlands, took her own life after years of suffering over her mother's death
Oh my
and the
gosh.
impact it had on her and her siblings.
Wow.
So Richard McCann, who I've mentioned several times, who I love him, has done many interviews over the years. He told a news station that interviewed him. I've seen several of his interviews. He's told this news station that he wanted the police to once and for all apologize about the language that they used, basically, and how Jane was innocent and the rest of the women were not,
We're
apparently.
not
Yeah.
innocent. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a quote from him that said, my mom was completely innocent and deserved to live. So I'm like, so the Yorkshire police did release like an official apology. There was some stuff that did eventually come out in 2005. I think it had to do with that special report that it,
Mm-hmm.
it was just a shit storm of just horribleness.
Right.
So the BBC4 did a Yorkshire Ripper Files, a very British crime story in 2019. It's
Mm-hmm.
a short series, and of course the docu-series on Netflix, The Ripper. So I guess a lot of the victims and family of victims were having like an issue with the title. And like they were having some issues with the docuseries in itself because they didn't want Peter Sutcliffe to get this like celebrity status that he
Right.
didn't deserve. But I
Mhm.
guess the director was like, we're not trying to tell it from his side of things. What we're trying to do is we're trying to come at it from the investigation side of everything, and just to reveal England at the time and just showing the progression of the investigation. They didn't even say Peter Sutcliffe until the very last episode. Now, that being said, the docuseries, how I feel about the docuseries. So they did use the word prostitute quite a bit. Anybody that would say sex worker, they would say prostitute. Now, I'm not offended by that or anything, because maybe in England, of course I've never been there. I'm not quite sure if this is correct. Maybe I'm talking out of line here, but maybe like we in the United States say sex worker,
Mhm.
but maybe in England they use a different term for it, because in the United States we say sex worker is politically correct, but
Mhm.
maybe in England they use the term prostitute still. Again, I could be completely wrong. I'm not sure.
Right.
My biggest issue with the docuseries was that they didn't mention Marguerite Walls at all. They put in
Oh.
a little, like I said, it was just a little bleep at the end that was like, oh, and Marguerite Walls was killed in 1980. She became the
Yeah.
13th Ripper victim.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, because anytime that they would find somebody, anytime that they would find a body, they would put their name up and show a picture of them.
Mhm.
I was waiting for it because she was technically the 12th woman that was killed, but they passed her right by, and I was kind of like, what? Hold on. So I watched
Yeah.
the whole thing, and then her name finally just popped up at the very end, was like, oh, hey, by the way.
Hmm.
That was my biggest problem with
Yeah.
the docuseries. But other than that, like I thought it was well done,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, I need to watch it. I watched the Night Stalker one. Um and that was interesting, but I how many episodes is The Ripper?
4.
4 episodes.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe this weekend I'll watch it.
But yeah, watch it. It is good. So that is Peter Sutcliffe. And I could have gone into more detail with certain things, and I should have, but I didn't want to do a 3-part on this fucker.
Yeah.
So,
He's an ingrown toenail that has finally been taken care of.
finally been cut off the toe.
Right.
So, thank you for joining us. You can follow us on Facebook at
2K away.
And you can follow us on Instagram at 2K Away Podcast. We do have a YouTube channel. It is 2K Away Podcast. And we do have Gmail that you can email us at 2kawaypodcast@gmail.com. Every time you write 2K, it is with the number 2. Thank you for joining us this week on the finale of Peter Sutcliffe's case. And, apologies to all the families that were involved. And of course, we are going to post the names of the women that we mentioned in this particular episode as well.
Yep.
So, thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye bye.